Good morning. I'm Jonathan Kaplan, and really pleased to be moderating this panel on taking innovation mainstream. I hope folks aren't suffering too much from summit fatigue on day 3 and panel number 75 that you all are probably attending, but really pleased to have you join us here this morning. And we have a terrific group of panelists really representing the global perspective on taking innovation mainstream. And I would just ask everyone, we're not going to do lengthy introductions of any sort. You've got all the information on the app, and you can see that. But I do want to introduce, starting from my right, Rob Paddock, who's based in South Africa and is the founder and chief academic officer of Get Smarter. To his right, James Pitman from the UK and managing director for higher education for the StudyGroup. To his right, Josh Nestor, based in Australia and head of education for SEEK. And at the other end, Eric Roland, who's the director of partnerships for the Tang Institute at Phillips Andover. This is a topic that is really important in the context of what ASU GSV is all about, which is there are a lot of people in this room, not just up on the panel, who are involved in innovation as it relates to education. But that innovation is only relevant to the extent that it can be put into practice and brought to scale in a way to have a real impact. I'm in the world of online education, and I'm president and CEO of a large online university, and certainly find that even at the scale we're at, we're not having the kind of global impact that we want to have. And I was reading the New Yorker magazine last night and saw a great quote that I thought I would reference. It's from the writer William Gibson, who observed, "The future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed." And the fact is there's a massive amount of innovation that's out in the marketplace. The question is, how do we more evenly distribute it? How do we get those solutions to scale in a way that has a real impact? And I think we've got a terrific panel to discuss just those issues. Sort of 3 areas of focus that we'll dive into and talk about a number of different solutions and innovations. But first is solutions that have gone mainstream and been successful, and why that's the case. The second topic we want to cover relates to innovations that are delivering great outcomes but haven't gone to scale yet, haven't been broadly accepted. How do we address that? And third, how do we engage the establishment to penetrate markets and more evenly distribute the change that we all want to see, particularly that education can provide? So with that, and we're going to be really informal and just jump right in, not with any specific questions, but with those topics as broad themes that we'll address. And I know one of the topics that we talked about ahead of time was partnerships. And I know, Josh, that's an area that you've been focused on, and you've seen some real success across Asia in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jonathan. So just for you guys that don't know, SEEK is an online careers company. We're in about 20 different countries, headquartered in Australia. We have the largest job websites across 12 different markets, including mainland China, many parts of Southeast Asia and Latin America. We've been helping distribute education and explore the nexus between online careers and education long before LinkedIn made it fashionable through their acquisition of Lynda. We've been doing it for about 12 years. And one of the innovations that we're really excited about in the partnership space is around whatever you call it, the OPM model, the white label model, the 2U model, helping bricks and mortar universities to go online. And what's really interesting when you step back and look at the different versions of that model around the world, I guess 2U was kind of a pioneer in America, and they're doing a great job with tier 1 university brands, and the average I think price of a 2U program is about $75,000 US. So, you know, I guess from a developing market perspective, where a lot of our focus is, that's probably out of reach for most people. But what's really interesting to see is the versions of local models that 2U has inspired in these markets. Now, we have one of those models ourselves in Australia that we're involved with that's been doing very well, but again, the price points are too high to scale in developing markets. What we're seeing, you know, the one I wanted to raise as an example is Topica in Vietnam. They have 25,000 students all studying online in what is a 90 million population market, but, you know, still relatively underdeveloped. What's really interesting is they're delivering, you know, quality online programs on behalf of tier 1 Vietnamese institutions, and they're charging $2,000 for a whole degree, and you know, and scaling well. So I think that's a really good, relevant example of where partnerships are driving, you know, innovation via online in a developing market context. Yeah.
James, in the UK, you've seen a number of models that work effectively.
Yes, I mean, partnership is absolutely our business, actually. Sort of good. Consumers around the world will never have heard of StudyGroup, and that's the way we like it, because we partner with universities all over the world. And maybe taking a step back to the more traditional model of students coming on campus, I think partnership's absolutely critical for scalability and speed into market, so that taking that innovation and moving it very quickly. If you look back in Australia, which is the innovators actually a pathway programs for international students. And international students is all about widening participation. It's giving access to students who normally wouldn't have access to those universities around the world. It's not because those students are not bright enough, it's just they haven't had the educational opportunity. So we really see it as a moral opportunity as well as a commercial one. But the Australians led on that. They've been doing it for 20 years now. In the UK, we've been doing it for 10 years. In America, you know, here, it's actually a relatively immature marketplace. So how can we challenge and take that model of scalability and moving it really quickly into the US market? Just take an example of the US university. Well, we as an organisation have 300 sales and marketing staff, 40 regional offices. We recruit 73,000 international students. An individual university in the US could set that up, but it would take them probably about 5 years. It might cost them $5 million. And really, do they have any sense of success? There's risk around that. So it's how can you leverage what is already a proven model and take that and access all these really good quality students from all over the world. I talk about the marzipan there. You know, these are students at the higher level, those that can afford it, but then below them there's a huge numbers of students who can't afford it. And those are the ones who get sponsorship from corporate government organisations or corporates. And you know, that's the purpose of our model, is to widen that participation to bring it through partnership those students into universities around the world.
Yeah, I'm very interested by what you say, and I think one of the questions that's constantly on my mind is, what are the drivers for why institutions should require partnerships in the first place? Why can't universities just do this all themselves? And for me, having had about now 8 years of exposure to working with universities in Africa and now internationally, it constantly comes back to the question of what is the core competence of a university? And the universities are often actually asked to do quite a lot of different things. They are research institutions, often first and foremost. That's typically what drives their rankings. They are required to provide a liberal arts undergraduate education and then some sort of career-orientated postgraduate education. And that's quite a broad range of competencies to develop for any institution. And at some point you ask yourself, well, is it possible that you can not only do all of these things, but then also set yourself up to effect with all the specialized functions that are required to take a program online to market and enroll students across broader geographies than you're typically used to? And really the question then is, well, if it's not part of our core competence, then why are we doing it? Why don't we set up these strategic partnerships with institutions and organizations that can? But there's this constant fear from academic institutions that, well, are we not effectively outsourcing what should be the holy grail of our academic delivery, presentation, and so on? So there's this very interesting need to balance what the split of responsibilities is between private organizations and public institutions. And that's an area that I'm sure many of us on the panel have had quite a lot of exposure to. It's actually quite different from institution to institution, at least in my experience. I'm not sure how you guys have found that.
It's quite interesting that some academics actually don't want to do the things that we do. Because actually
That's
all
right.
our pathway programs are sort of, you could call them sub-degree, and actually getting an academic to teach in the first year can be challenging. Getting them to teach in a sub-degree that's really, really challenging. And it's just the reach into market. We recruit from 170 countries. There's no way that an individual institution could do that. And actually all we're doing is making possible a cooperation between a significant number of universities who themselves could not collaborate to do that, but through us can.
Well, many institutions are very conservative, not in the political sense, but in the sense that adapting, changing is difficult to do. Eric, you're part of an institution that's been around for more than 200 years.
That's
it doesn't get more establishment than
I would,
Phillips Academy.
I would completely agree. Founded 2 years after the birth of the United States, so established indeed. And I am within a center that is focused on connected learning. That's just a couple of years old, so trying to push the envelope a little bit in terms of thinking about different forms of teaching and learning. Certainly what's been mentioned already in terms of partnerships is absolutely critical in order to affect change. And this idea of complementarity that has been mentioned already is something that we have our mind on and our focus on as well. I think one of the models that we've been enamored with that we've seen play out in a few different cities, at least in the United States, was born out of LRNG, formerly Cities of Learning, also the Hive Learning Network that's powered by the Sprout Fund in Pittsburgh as well. And this is a model that brings together a variety of institutions, schools, museums, libraries, businesses, and others to create new, innovative learning opportunities. And it's not only a means of engaging students who may not be engaged, but also a means of bringing together institutions that may not talk to one another. And so it's been our experience just in early conversation with nearby districts, towns, and cities that there is just a wealth of information and ways in which we can partner with one another, and also very importantly reduce some of the inefficiencies. Quite frankly, we're doing similar things or talking about similar things right next to one another. But this is a way of truly bringing that together as well. Sometimes easier said than done, but in any case, I think the model is the right one.
Right.
Another example is a partnership which can drive flexibility, actually. I'm not sure how many of the audience are aware that the academic years in different countries actually are very, very different. So if you only have an academic year in the pathway that starts in September, you're actually missing out or not giving an opportunity to a significant number of countries like Malaysia and Singapore and the various others. So by having that in-depth knowledge and awareness of different cultures and timings, that allows organisations like ourselves to actually provide the flexibility and choice to students that otherwise would actually they'd be almost discriminating against those nationalities.
I think one of the areas that universities are loath to admit they're not particularly good at is the delivery of teaching and of programs online, because they obviously see teaching as core to what they do alongside research, but the reality is that what makes a great classroom lecturer doesn't make it necessarily a great online tutor or facilitator or coach, and so that's what a lot of this OPM type model is about. The example of the one that we've built in Australia, we have 350 what we call online learning facilitators that are based all around the country. Some of them work at universities in their local area, but they do additional work, and we have to put them through an entire training program and only pick the best ones to teach and deliver online. So that capability is all housed within a disruptive organisation that sits outside of the university, because it can't exist inside the university. I think this idea of each institution focusing on what they're good at, universities on credentialing, obviously the brand, and in some cases the curriculum, but then augmenting that with online delivery capability. We also provide sales and marketing, so we enroll students, and digital marketing is something that we know well, and so it's about how we combine those three things to deliver 30, 40, 50,000 enrollments a year.
I would just pick up on exactly what you said, agreed completely. I think one of the findings that we've had is the specificity and the clarity around those different areas of expertise are critical. We've encountered plenty of goodwill and great intention with others, but getting to that place of how do we actually work together requires a great investment in time. Ideally, it's at the early end where you can sit down together and craft it. Sometimes it ends up being a memorandum of understanding. In other cases, it's a handshake. But it's, at some point or another, it needs to be detailed. It needs to be specified and based exactly on what you say. What are we best each doing that we can work together at as well?
And whether we're talking about Phillips Andover or partnering with an established university, one of the challenges associated with taking innovation mainstream is that innovation fails sometimes. And in fact, we kind of need to embrace the failure of innovations in order to iterate and keep going. In working with various partners, how do you bring them along, be that partner an institution, a government, a regulator, in terms of being a stakeholder that's associated with a business or an institution? How do we help create a culture of innovation that accepts the failures that come with it?
So Jonathan, I've got a particular example that is quite relevant to that point. We found that, at least in our model, where we're integrating with university partners, they provide faculty who work with us in order to design the programs and then provide the quality assurance and oversight of the programs. But we provide the marketing, the sales, the enrollments, the facilitation of the course, the technology, et cetera, et cetera. And what we found is that those faculty members are most interested in, they typically are researchers first and foremost, and they're very interested in the data. So the idea that we can present upfront that we are going to be experimenting with a couple of new pedagogical models, we are going to be experimenting with different teaching and learning mechanisms, but we're going to have the data to assess what the impact of those innovations are. And we found that one of the ways of overcoming the challenge of innovation, the challenge of failure, particularly with established, more traditional institutions, is to make sure that you've got the data and the learning analytics behind what's happening. And what ends up the result of that is we actually have a quasi-experimental platform for the universities to engage with students at a much broader scale than they ever would have been able to do before. But we've got the data behind it that they can then use for publications, research. So yes, we've had radical failures in some cases. We try to keep them small and incremental and improve on them very quickly. But that's been a way of bringing the faculty with us with that experimentation.
One of the reasons that education institutions choose to partner with organisations like that is because I don't think they can afford or be seen to fail inside their own organisations. They have brands, 200-year-old brands to protect and things like that, and so they work with us, and we bring. And I think not just our organisation, but organisations like us bring, I guess, more of that product, online software development mentality, where it's all about MVP, it's all about finding product market fit. And an example I have is 12 years ago where we approached the TAFE New South Wales. TAFE is the public vocational system in Australia. We approached a government department and we said, we think we can deliver online vocational training in a different way via our audience. They were delivering some online training, but they were delivering it within one state within Australia. And we said, we can take you to a national audience, but it requires a different kind of product. They had a view that it was all about modular education, and we had a view that was all about entire qualifications but delivered bare bones. And because what our job seekers we felt really needed was a piece of paper, not just a skill. And so we had a difference of opinion. We were not the experts, they were. So we said, right, let's do both. And that's what we did. So it wasn't hard. Within 6 months we put up both offerings, and within 2 months, in that particular example we were right. There are other examples where we're wrong, the partner's right. But in the end, we've enrolled 250,000 students in a new kind of online qualification in Australia that was born out of an experiment. Yeah.
We're quite lucky because we have a big test bed of lots of university partners. We have some who are very conservative. We have one university partner that's 500 years old. It all depends on the senior management and whether they get people that work with us and take risks. And I think the great thing is, we take risks, obviously, some work, some don't. The great thing is when they do work, we can then scale that right the way through all of our partnerships, so they all benefit from being part of the network. And I think that's one of the real benefits as well.
I think we really, among other things, look to model some of that failure as well. We're trying to get as many good ideas with enough support out there, but recognize, and we've seen that not everything is going to work, and to share that internally and externally as well, and again, to model it. I think one of the most important internal partnerships that we have, just picking up on what Rob had said earlier, is with our Director of Institutional Research, and thinking about creative ways of assessment that are qualitative and quantitative, that allow us to kind of, at different points, see where we are, and then build those feedback loops into what we're doing, and then grow things out continuously. But certainly not hide the fact that there are some things that just aren't going to work. And there's a tremendous amount that we can learn from that as well. We actually have an internal project. A colleague of ours is leading something around helping people cultivate a learning disposition. And as part of that, helping them embrace failure. Wow. And so initially it was delivered at students, but now has expanded to the adults on our campus as well. And I think it's important for all of us to be using the language of, I tried, I failed, I learned a tremendous amount, and then to continue to build on that as well.
All right. Josh, I think you mentioned MVP, and you meant minimum viable product.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and which is a great model and something that everybody can grab a hold of. It's not going to require a $5 million investment that an institution then has to write off if they can start small and maybe outsource the failure to, well, not to us, but maybe to one of you guys, and enable them to affect change internally, gain buy-in, particularly more conservative institutions, more established institutions. Wondering what kind, just from each of you, pedagogical models that you're seeing succeed, even in small doses, and where you see real opportunity in the future for maximum impact across society more broadly than perhaps we're seeing today, or things that are beginning to become established but still have greater potential for impact.
So I can talk a little bit about flipped learning, which I know is not particularly new, but for us, given that we exclusively deal with international students, it's actually incredibly powerful, because obviously in most situations which you're dealing with mixed ability classes, we're dealing with not only mixed ability but mixed cultures and mixed academic backgrounds. And to give you an example of that, there are some cultures where on paper we get students applying to some of our universities who look as if they've got 99% in their maths secondary education. When we test them on arrival, we actually find that in certain key areas, it happens to be fractions in relation to the Middle East, they have an issue with that. And so when they're wanting to progress onto engineering courses, that's a big issue. But with flipped learning, obviously the benefit there is that the students can obviously do that preparation, and the instructors and teachers can see exactly the areas where they're having to repeat and repeat and repeat. And that really can inform then how the teacher handles the class. But I do think for international students it is particularly powerful, because they are at these completely different levels, and obviously part of our purpose is to actually not only instill a baseline of academic study and rigor to be able to progress into degree studies, but actually to change the way they learn, because they come from very, very different learning environments. Many of them have learned by rote, and to switch them, transition them into that sort of independent learning environment is one of our big challenges. But I'm a really big believer in flipped learning specifically for international students.
I think that relates very well too for our non-traditional sort of working adult segments that we tend to try to focus on, globally. The example, I think I've got two examples. One is competency-based the competency-based model, which goes hand in hand with the flipped classroom model. The quote around the future is happening in pockets, competency-based education is happening in America in a big way amongst the non-profits, and we're seeing big growth there with Southern New Hampshire and Western governors and others. In Australia, the vocational system has been based on competency-based education for decades, and it's been very successful, but it's based on the premise really, right, that not all mature age students are empty vessels on the way in, and they all learn at different paces. And I think that we're going to see a lot more of that, because it just makes great sense in terms of time is a variable, and it allows people to move through and recognise that their prior work and prior experience, etc., and also helps keep the costs right down, which is critical for developing markets. The other one I wanted to just touch on hasn't kind of scaled yet, but I'm really excited about it because I live in this world that's really thinking about the nexus between education and job outcomes and careers, but it's job readiness, because as we know, there's that great McKinsey study that says something like 70 or 80% of schools believe they're producing the graduates that industry need, but only 40% of industry agree with them. So you've got this mismatch, and what we know is there's this concept now of the skills gap, and I think that notion has been quite clearly defined and articulated now around a series of soft skills: grit, determination, leadership, critical thinking, problem solving, and then there's the hard skills around managing data, project management, market research, business case development, all of those things that are universal skills that every employer wants graduates to know, but most graduates don't actually have. A model like Fullbridge is seeking to own that space. I don't know why Fullbridge isn't a $1 billion company today. I think it should be, and I think that for the amount of money that you spend on college, spending an extra $500 to take a 45-hour program that will give you those skills makes huge sense. So I expect to see big growth in that model going forward.
I'd offer two examples as well, kind of building on what we've heard already. One is around that blended hybrid model. I think that's something that not only are we experimenting with, but we have certainly seen where at the core there is excellent in-person teaching, and then thinking about integrating the best of online resources as well. A slightly different one, and one that I think is still growing, at least in the United States, is around the idea of a maker model and integrating makerspace into education, in many cases in low-cost ways. One of the organizations where we've seen this play out really well is an outfit called Nuvu Studio in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and it's based upon an architecture studio model where students have real challenges provided by organizations, corporate or otherwise, that are provided to them, and a series of mentors that provide feedback as they are building solutions and going through truly a human-centered design process, and exposure to all of the social, emotional skills that you mentioned as well, that are so critical. And again, it's a model that doesn't necessarily require a tremendous investment, but I think what it generates for students is remarkable.
And Eric, perhaps just to build on the point around innovations that don't require immense investment, but can have an incredible return. A trend that we're seeing, and that we're certainly very big advocates for in South Africa, educating African students, is this idea that the role of a teacher is actually quite multifaceted in a traditional classroom, be it at a school level, be it at a graduate level. Teachers are expected to do a lot of different things. Not only are they subject matter experts, they're also confidants, they are counselors, they are major administrators. And I guess one of the things that the tech world forces us to do is to really critically evaluate these individual functions and say, is this a sensible grouping of skills for one person to do? Do we not lose some efficiency and efficacy in each one of these functions by bundling them all together? And so a trend that we're seeing across all the examples that have been given on the panel today is that disaggregation of the role of a teacher, and saying that each one of these functions actually requires specialist attention, specialist skills. If you're a teacher, Be a teacher, be a full-time subject matter expert facilitating in the online context, discussion forums, marking assignments, providing rich feedback, leading project work. That's a full-time role. Separately, there's a full-time role for administrators who are supporting that function. Separately, there's a role for course coaches who are using rich learning analytics to track and monitor the activity of students and proactively intervene when they're starting to fall behind, using the skills of executive coaching. These are all individual disciplines in many other industries other than education, and we see it as a great opportunity to do more of that disaggregation within this sector.
Yeah. And one of the limiting factors is that there are some significant impediments to change, institutional, government regulation, and the like, that would rather have certainty than testing and trying things in a new way, particularly around education, and even more so at the K-12 level, at least here in the States, but I think elsewhere in the world as well. How would you suggest addressing some of those impediments? How do we bring various stakeholders together and encourage change, innovation, testing? I think your suggestion earlier about the sharing of data is meaningful. Absolutely. And can bring people along.
And I guess the examples that we have, because we've encountered major institutional roadblocks over the last 8 years, be it within the institution themselves, be it at a government and regulatory level, there have been a number of roadblocks. And the way that we've consistently overcome those roadblocks is to position every single new thing that we do as a pilot. That this is we're not committing to anything more than a pilot project, a once-off, and we're going to have the data afterwards, and we're going to assess both quantitatively and qualitatively the impact that this pilot has had. From there, use that data to take it to the relevant stakeholders. But we typically find that innovation, at least in our partnerships, happens more at the grassroots level than it does at the central administration level. You get change, you get examples, evidence of positive change, and that can then filter up as opposed to filtering down. I'm sure you guys have had lots of experiences.
I can think of about 3 different places where I can use that one, so that's a good one. There's no doubt that regulations and governments in general play a huge role in this, and in the context of developing markets, you've got to think about regulations in several different ways. One is around the regulations that impact higher education, and then related regulations in other industries like the technology industry or the services industry. They can often be quite different. You've also got to think about the foreign ownership restrictions. If you're a foreign provider looking to get into some of these developing markets, that's actually the biggest challenge. In a market like Indonesia, good luck. And which is really sad, because that's where the need is the greatest. And you'd love to think that governments would embrace foreign involvement and working with local providers to provide these at scale, globally benchmarked quality solutions. Unfortunately, that's just not the case. And I think the first thing is picking the markets where you've got a government that's actually open to these kinds of things. And so, an example would be Malaysia, where Malaysia's really got behind online education and learning in a big way. There's a government blueprint out there that's looking to educate another 1 million people in higher education over the next 10 years. And half of their 10 shifts that they're advocating for relate to online education. Sure. And so we see huge opportunity for growth in that market, as opposed to Indonesia, where it's a closed shop. In 3 years' time, hopefully it will be different. They just opened up 30 industries in the last 3 months, but unfortunately education wasn't on the list.
In the UK, we talk about the dead hand of government, basically stopping things from happening. And, but of course that
the dead hand? You said dead hand.
Stops everything. Right. But of course that also requires innovation itself. And, together with our partners, we have to come up with innovative solutions to get round those kind of regulatory environments. When if you stop from doing it in that country, well, we'll do it offshore, we'll do it blended, we'll do it online, we can do it other ways. But yeah, don't get me started on visa regulations in the UK, because that really is a real problem for international education. However, I think certainly working with our partners, they also like to see innovative solutions coming out, and maybe taking their brands to do pathway delivery out in source markets. There are lots and lots of innovations going on all the time, but it's normally trying to get around government regulation at home.
Yeah,
sad to say.
And I would agree with what's been shared already. Certainly the idea of thinking about pilots, learning from those, and you know, kind of removing some of the, at least the perception of risk associated with it. One of the things as well that we give some thought to, again, is the complementarity piece and thinking about a variety of partners and what each one can provide. I think recognizing that, for example, as an independent school, there's a bit more flexibility and freedom that we have and can facilitate things and maybe incur some costs. And I'm not necessarily talking about dollar costs, but some of the costs involved has helped certainly as well. But one of the most effective ways has been around demonstrating the demand from students and parents who are calling for certain change. And I think that has, putting that in front of our partners or potential partners has helped facilitate conversations and get us to a place of, okay, let's find a way to get this done. Absolutely.
There's one thing I'd add around regulations, which is change. Regulations change all the time, and change itself creates significant opportunities. So if I use Brazil as the example, one of the biggest change we've seen in the last 12 months or so has been the removal of the government loan scheme, FIES. And so FIES fueled an absolute bonanza for growth in higher education. So suddenly the Brazilian government was lending students the money on terms a bit like your mother would lend you the money. It was like 3% interest rates, and you know, you don't have to pay it back. Open access, open slather. And so you have these huge education institutions that have grown up off the teat of the government, if you like, in terms of that funding. That then got removed overnight because the government ran out of money. And what's that triggered? Overnight, the share prices of these large private higher education institutions sort of dropped 30, 40%. But what it spawned was huge growth in online because the government funding didn't cover online, it covered on campus. And while it was free to go on campus, no one studied online. As soon as you make on campus, you have to pay for it, then people are looking for the most affordable study option out there, and that's online. And so now what you're seeing is a new wave of growth in online in Brazil, and that's exciting, you know.
And there's a regulatory change potentially in China, as you probably know. Masters online programs are not recognised by the government for jobs. Now, can that really go on forever? I don't think so. But at some point when that changes and that single regulatory change happens, there will be a massive jump.
And price is clearly, and cost, clearly an impediment. Josh, you mentioned earlier in Asia the need to ensure that in certain markets, it just the local pricing and the local model has to dictate. Certainly here at ASU GSV the last number of years, but going back 2 or 3, MOOCs has been a major topic. Rick Levin, the CEO of Coursera, just spoke earlier this morning. And massive open online courses, at least some forms of them, continue to be open and free. Does that have the potential for great impact socially and to bring the innovation of distance learning and great content forward in a way that's meaningful? James, Josh?
Yeah, no, look, absolutely, it does. I think the version 1.0 of MOOCs has sort of come and gone, and now what we're seeing is version 2 and 3, and I think that's much more exciting. And what we're seeing now is MOOCs forming part of pathways into accredited either certificates or in some cases entire bachelor programs or postgraduate programs. You can do your freshman year of ASU through edX. You can do 6 months of the MIT postgraduate in supply chain as a MOOC. And what that does is opens up the access and reduces the cost. And so what you're seeing now in countries, if I use Malaysia as an example, the government's just released draft guidelines mandating that public universities in Malaysia will have to recognise 1/3 of degree programs as credit transfers for students that are undertaking MOOCs, because they're trying to increase access, to university and create 1 million new places. I think that's pretty much world leading in terms of MOOC adoption. And it's just an example for me of the direction in which MOOCs, the MOOC model is heading.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I see MOOCs from the other side, from the university perspective, and particularly UK universities have ummed and ahed about whether they dip their toe in MOOCs or commercial online, that kind of thing. I have a slightly radical view about this, because I think a lot of universities will wake up and realise that their top research-intensive academics have been spending a huge amount of time on these MOOCs. And I would almost categorise these MOOCs as being vanity projects for academics who've got too much time on their hands, literally. And it just waits for the financial director of a big university to realise how much time and resource is being expended on a relatively modest range of MOOCs, which may be garnering big volumes, but is it really having a significant impact and benefit for that institution? And we endlessly get told by our university partners, we want our top academics to be doing research. Well, why are they fiddling around with this?
Yeah, I mean, I must say I similarly see the MOOC phenomenon from the university perspective. We work very closely with university partners, all of whom have gone into the MOOC space. And there's almost a perfect storm of activity happening. There's, in every corner of the globe, the funding is being restricted year on year that's coming to the universities. Simultaneously, they're spending money, their top researchers' time on these MOOCs, delivering them to a global audience, and at the moment with no absolute certainty on what the financial return will be. And I guess to the point, Josh, about this iterative nature of MOOCs, they're going somewhere. And I can tell you where they're going is towards finding a financially sustainable model. They've got to. I mean, a lot of the MOOCs are backed by massive venture capitalists. I promise you that it's not just humanitarian goodwill that they're looking to employ on the world. There's a capital driver behind these right now. But the universities are kind of stuck in the middle right now, because a lot of the universities actually pay money to the MOOC providers to get their courses onto the MOOC platforms. And so if we're not effectively democratizing education and we're not making any money, then what are we doing again with these programs right now? And I guess it just comes back to your point, Josh, that there's going to be iterations of this. I would, if I had to gaze into the crystal ball, I'd say a lot of existing universities that are on the MOOC platforms will pull back. And some of the ones that are still there, possibly the ones with the broadest reaching brands, will find versions of these MOOCs that are both financially sustainable and allow them to effectively expose the great research that's happening at the university.
In terms of providing quality education, at least in thinking about the secondary school model, they are an important part, but at the heart is that critical in-person teaching. And so, I go back to the hybrid model and the blended model as being so important. Certainly one of the things that we, not just our school, but others, has witnessed as well is the cost, picking up on what Rob says. Not only in terms of getting the infrastructure in place, the design labs and everything that's needed to support the creation of a new course, but also the time that it requires as well. And I'll speak from a residential independent school. Time is an important commodity as people are living and coaching and teaching and all sorts of other things. So I think it requires quite a bit of calculation in terms of opportunity cost as well.
I'm a great believer in blended. From a student choice perspective, I think about international students at the moment, they have to get a visa, come to country, go on campus. But we're beginning to validate blended programs, so they have a choice. And then they can do some online in their own country, they come onto campus. And I think it's the way it's going to go. For absolutely sure. But I see a continuum between those two extremes, isn't it?
Yeah,
for sure.
So we give the ultimate choice to the consumer, which is the way it should be.
And I think we have a tendency to, including people here at this conference, there's a tendency to get a bit religious about these issues. That I think you'd be hard pressed to find anyone around here who isn't a big believer in online education and the promise that it holds. But at the same time, we really can't view these things in that context. We have to look at the particular function and determine what modality is right to help with that. If it's an intensive remedial need that a student has, that may be a way in which faculty and teachers need to be engaging directly with the student. And there may be, and there certainly are, lots of other ways in which distance learning, and adaptive can really be meaningful. You relayed the TED talk that Sal Khan gave about learning to ride a bicycle.
Yes,
And I just find that that's a perfect way to describe the challenge we face in traditional pedagogical models and ways that we can vastly improve. You want to
So the quote from Sal Khan was that if we're teaching a kid how to ride a bike, we don't say, okay, plan beforehand, it's going to take about 10 hours for the student to learn how to ride a bike. Okay, so now I'm going to sit with Johnny and you're going to learn how to ride a bike now. I'm going to show you a couple of things and then you're going to learn. 10 hours is now up. You're not quite there, you're falling off every 3 minutes or so, you're going to get a D. Okay, now we're going to learn how to ride a unicycle. And it's kind of crazy. It's a beautifully simple example, but it's actually not dissimilar from the way that we progress students through their learning activities. And I think there's a wonderful potential fusion here of a competency-based approach towards education, as well as a more adaptive learning path based on the personal needs of individual students, that has the radical potential to overcome this challenge, to provide a much more meaningful and personalized approach to learning. I guess one of the questions with this is, coming back to the need to kind of define specific students learning specific skills at specific times in their lives. It's easy to talk about kind of adaptive and personalized learning as this big concept that's going to apply to everything. We actually have to get right down to the detail if we're going to make a meaningful impact.
That's right.
I have a sense that it's possible in the next 5 to 10 years for us to have tech driving really incredible adaptive learning for fairly standardized subjects, certain K through 12 subjects, that there's not a lot of subjectivity in the subject matter, where tech can really, really play a meaningful role in adaptive learning. You want to try to do the same sort of thing with a liberal arts undergrad or a creative writing course where there's a huge amount of subjectivity. I don't know in the next 5 to 10 years that we're going to have the technology to do that. I mean, I think there's a need to kind of view these different types of education for different students at different times very individually.
I think on the adaptive learning point, we're seeing there's some really interesting innovation in around things like adaptive learning happening in developing markets like Brazil. Now test preparation in Brazil, there's some really great product tech-driven test preparation business platforms that use adaptive learning and are scaling, yet to generate revenue, to be determined whether they will, but certainly being adopted at scale, which is interesting. I wanted to just quickly make a point around the blended learning, because there's no doubt that blended learning is probably the most effective way to learn, and is a great best of both worlds. I think there's a certain inevitability though when you spend time in traffic in Kuala Lumpur or in Jakarta or in Manila, that it has to go online. So it's not the preferred mode of delivery for many. There's huge cultural resistance to studying purely online in many of these countries. But when we talk to our job-seeking audience, it's the only way they want to learn. It's the only way they're able to learn, because at the moment the alternatives they face are either evening class, of which they just can't get there because of the horrendous traffic, or studying on weekends, and so they're giving up their entire weekends to study, and then they're working during the week, and so I think it's just inevitable that it's online or nothing for certainly a large share of the working adult populations, I think, in developing markets in general.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Josh, that online, it might actually be narrower than that, which is it's mobile in those markets or it's nothing.
Absolutely.
Because there's no other way in which students, and particularly working students, will engage. We have a few minutes for questions, and please just raise your hand, shout it out if you have one, or comments about anything we've covered or any other innovation topics. And then I know, do we have Mr. Bill Gates speaking in just a few minutes? Right, so people are going to want to get some good seats, I know. Any last comments from our panelists this morning that we didn't get to touch upon? We hit it all?
I mean, maybe just
Eric,
in thinking about the partnerships, one of the pieces that I'd like to make even more explicit is thinking of the network effect. You know, I think some of the examples that we shared around local partnerships are powerful models in terms of what they do among local partners, but to think about what can happen in terms of scale as well, I think is really critical, and that there's some exciting work to be done in that area, not just bringing together a geographically close group, but also thinking about what can happen in terms of a more network scale and a truly global scale as well.
Great. Well, I want to thank our panel for the discussion this morning, and thank you all for joining us.